I'm joined now by our former Labour advisor, Isha Hazarika, the Financial Times political editor, George Parker, and Tom Harwood, who is a journalist and reporter for the Guido Fawkes online blog. Welcome to you both. George, people watching tonight will say, all right, the Commons voted against the May deal decisively for a second time. Looks like it's going to vote against no deal tonight. What happens next?
Well, it's a good question. I think the first thing we're going to hear is from Theresa May. I think she'll make a statement immediately after these votes this evening to try and set out what the government intends to do next. One of the things we're hearing tonight is that she may announce the idea of a series of votes to give the MPs a chance in the House of Commons to say what kind of Brexit they would be prepared to accept, the so-called indicative votes. And we had a hint of that earlier on today from the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, that this is the kind of way the debate's moving. So the idea would then be that the House of Commons could express a view on a second referendum or a much closer form of union with the EU, or Norway style.
People talk about Norway with the single market, customs union.
And I don't think that's a sort of act of political genius by Theresa May. I think the thing is, if they don't offer MPs an indicative vote, I think there'll be an effort by MPs to force her to do that tomorrow in the House of Commons.
But if the government goes that way, it's an attempt to grab back a process that it looks like it's been losing control. It wanted to leave in the May deal, it didn't get that. It's always said that no deal was better than a bad deal. It's now asking MPs to vote against no deal. We know that the tomorrow night's amendment to extend Article 50 was probably going to be amended to include the indicative votes on what do you want. If you don't like this, what do you like? If she goes that way, it's only trying to get back a process that Parliament is taking control.
Absolutely. Lots of MPs sitting in the House tonight are in a very difficult position. No one really knows in what direction it will go in because, of course, members in the House have voted against a lot of things, but they're still yet to vote in favour of anything at all. Voting against no deal tonight doesn't solve any kind of problem, doesn't actually prevent no deal in any meaningful sense.
But it could prevent it on March the 29th, because the government could move a statutory instrument, as they call it, a particular House of Commons technique that would push the leaving date back.
It could certainly delay it, but only with the consent of the EU. And voices in the EU have been very adamant that they're not willing to provide a long delay, at least one beyond the end of May, because that gets into European election territory, and that gets incredibly tricky for everyone involved. So really, this isn't a unilateral thing that the government or indeed Parliament can dictate. It has to be with the consent of the EU, and crucially, with the consent of all 27 member states of the EU. So that's to be negotiated, and really there is still that chance of no deal. And this is where ERG, European Research Group MPs in Parliament, the Eurosceptics in Parliament, find themselves in a bit of a tricky situation. On the one hand, the chances of no deal do seem to be diminishing. So some switched earlier this week into backing Theresa May's deal as almost the only way to get Brexit. But for others, there is still that glimmer of hope that no deal is achievable, although that is diminishing.
Well, let me ask Aisha that, because Mrs May well say, and she certainly has endurance on this, that, all right, you don't like my deal, but the Commons has now voted against no deal. We could be in for a punishment beating from the EU when we go to ask for an extension. She may well come back before the end of March to have a third vote to see if more people fall in line.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's every chance that that could happen. I mean, this is a woman who is very much wedded to her deal. I mean, even today, her advisors and her will have holed up and said, right, OK, how can we try and find a way of bringing this back? The problem is
third time lucky.
Exactly, you know, third time lucky.
or not.
Exactly.
Or not.
Well, that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think we're in very, very tricky territory, because the only way to really break the gridlock is either she does a deal on the customs union, but that will split the Conservative Party, or she goes for the nuclear option, which is a general election or a second referendum. And all these indicative votes, I think, are still going to be difficult because there just isn't a settled view in Parliament. Even within my own party, the Labour Party, there is not one settled view on how we should. I know, who knew?
I never noticed that. Listen, stick with us. There's a lot to talk about. But let's now go to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young. She's in the Houses of Parliament. Vicky, explain to us about this amendment, what is now happening, what vote we're about to expect.
Yeah, I mean, there's been slight confusion around this all day, but if you think that the government is effectively later asking people to vote about not leaving without a deal at the end of March, what this one is doing is saying, look, the House of Commons does not want to leave the EU without a deal ever. So this goes much further than what the government is proposing. It was originally put forward by a Conservative MP. She then decided, actually, no, let's just stick and vote on the government's motion. Let's not bother about this one. But we have ended up with a vote on all of this. Now, it's significant because there are many MPs who think that there has to be a deal before we leave the EU, that it would be catastrophic. We even had the Chancellor today saying that a no-deal scenario would be terrible for the economy. So this is important too, because Conservative MPs have been told not to vote for it. So what we're going to be looking for as well is whether there have been any rebels. Theresa May has had a real problem keeping all of her MPs together, voting the same way. And really, you've got to remember, she has been forced into this position. She didn't want any of these votes. She did not want to take no deal off the table. The argument being that it's there almost as a way of getting a better deal, of having it there as a threat, really, because the EU, the UK, no one wants no deal, but it's there to try and force the EU to give us a better deal. So there'll be lots of MPs saying, no, it's got to stay on the table. It's madness to go into negotiation and not be very serious about walking away.
All right, Vicky, thanks for that. We can see the tellers beginning to gather at the by the mace in the House of Commons. We hope to get the result very shortly. They're just counting the final votes. George, this could be quite close, because I'm not sure what the Amber Rudds and other Conservatives in the Cabinet on the backbenches, do they vote for this or don't they? I
don't think they will. I mean, in theory, it could be close if a load of pro-Europeans vote for this.
Well, we'll find out, George. Let's go straight over to the Commons.
Order! The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 308. The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 308. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. We come now to Amendment F for Freddie, in the name of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Ashford, who moves it formally. The question is that Amendment F be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby!
So, another defeat for the government on the government's motion tonight on no deal. An amendment was moved which toughened up the no deal amendment, and it just squeaked through by 4 votes, by 312 to 308. But a defeat is a defeat. The government didn't want the motion to be this tough. The government now has an amended motion which is very tough on leaving without a deal. It's very tough against leaving without a deal. Let's go straight back to Vicky Young in the Houses of Parliament. Vicky, what are they making of this?
Yeah, there are gasps here because I don't think anyone expected this to go through. Once Caroline Spelman said she wasn't pushing it anymore, big doubts about whether Conservatives would get behind it, and you need to have rebel Conservatives who are going against what Theresa May had told them. Now, what I'm intrigued to find out is who were those Conservatives? Were any of them ministers who could well be forced to resign now? What they have voted for here is to have no deal not being on the table. They are saying there, the House of Commons has said, we are not happy about leaving the EU without some kind of deal. Now, we have to make clear this is not changing the law. Lots of people have been asking today, well, look, does this mean anything? It doesn't change the law. Can she be held to this, the Prime Minister? Many people would say that this is morally binding on the Prime Minister, that these votes have come forward. The House of Commons has spoken. The other thing to say here is that that amendment now is attached to what the government wanted. It effectively replaces what the government wants. So this idea that there's no deal at the end of March, that is now gone. If there's a vote, it will be on that motion as it has been changed now by MP. So it is a significant moment here, and it's going to be pretty fascinating to see how the Prime Minister responds to this. We know she had some of her cabinet ministers in with her just before this vote discussing what they do next. They probably didn't see this coming.
Thank you, Vicky. Now the Commons is voting on a second amendment. This is an amendment which has been put together mainly by Conservatives, Remainers and Leavers, and it's a different approach to Brexit. Basically what it says is that they should seek an extension. During that extension they would agree a much longer transition period, but it wouldn't be to get an overarching deal. We'd continue to pay money into the European Union, we'd then try to do a series of deals, and then we'd eventually come out in December 2021 without an overarching deal. We'll see how that goes. That one is not expected to win, but then that amendment there was not expected to win. George, your reaction?
Short-lived prediction by me. I thought that this was going to be quite an easy win for the government, because I spoke to a number of pro-European ministers during the day who didn't want this motion to be put at all. They were urging Caroline Spelman, one of the Tory backers of the motion, to withdraw it. They wanted to focus all the attention on the main government motion, specifically targeted on March the 29th. Now, the fact that the government has been defeated on that suggests to me that probably some ministers have resigned. They've broken the government whip and may have to resign.
We might have had, because the government whipped the Conservatives to stop this amendment from going through.
Exactly. This is the only vote tonight where the government has actually whipped MPs to oppose the motion. So it seems to me that this is quite unexpected, and Theresa May will be devastated by this, but it's a really important vote. You can hear people celebrating behind us because it basically says no deal is off the table as far as the British government
for the foreseeable future.
For the foreseeable future, yeah.
But it doesn't, as Vicky was saying there, it doesn't yet change the law. I think it makes no deal on March the 29th pretty much gone. But it doesn't necessarily rule out no deal later on unless the law is changed. But I guess now the Commons has spoken, there's a chance the law will be changed.
That's very true. This was a non-binding vote. There's nothing that directly happens as a consequence of it, but it does really put the government in a difficult position and does mean that the government will probably seek that extension. It also confirms the worst fears of Brexiteers sitting in Parliament. They know that they are a small minority within a Parliament that overwhelmingly voted Remain in the referendum, and it really puts Brexiteers in a very tricky position in terms of deciding what to do next and how to secure the cleanest possible Brexit.
Well, this comes back to my earlier point. It is now clear, if it hasn't been before, and some wondered why it hadn't been clear, but you can never discount slow learners in the environ of Westminster, that no deal is now off the table for the foreseeable future, perhaps forever. That may get some Brexiteers to have some second thoughts about opposing Mrs May's deal.
Absolutely. Now, just to be absolutely clear, until we completely revoke Article 50, no deal is not completely off the table. And this makes what happens tomorrow very important in terms of this extension of Article 50. What will this actually look like? Because if you have a short extension, then I think she will come back and have another bite of the cherry. And you are right, many Brexiteers will think Brexit delayed is Brexit denied. However, I know that Yvette Cooper and others will be pushing potentially for, and the EU themselves have said, look, if you're going to extend this, you may as well go long. And if you're going to go long, we're only going to give you that consent if you have a general election or a second referendum. So things are going to get really tricky tomorrow.
But if they go long, that will make Brexiteers have even more of a second thoughts, because their dream is kicked longer and longer into the distance.
There's another thing which has been floating around, which is Peter Kyle's amendment, which is the deal to Theresa May is, we vote to pass your deal, but you put it to the public.
I think that ship may have sailed on that. Stay with us, because I want to go back to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, in Brussels.